Today's lecture is entitled Mindset, Harnessing Psychology to Promote Achievement, and will be given by our own Dr. Matthew M. Dr. M received his bachelor's degree from the College of William & Mary and received his medical degree from the Ohio State University College of Medicine. He's a graduate of our combined medicine and pediatrics residency program, serving as chief resident in 2014. He's currently an assistant professor of clinical medicine in the Division of Internal Medicine here at the University of Miami and is one of our most highly rated attendings. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Matthew M.
Thank you very much for coming. Ooh, that's a lot. Thank you very much for coming to my grand rounds. I appreciate all of you being here. This is going to be a little bit of a different presentation probably than we get most of the time. We're going to be talking a little bit about psychology. We're going to be talking a little bit about learning theory. A caveat, I'm not a psychologist, but I am an educator. And so these concepts I think are going to be very useful for you, those of you who are still learning, and those of you who are involved in medical education, and those of you who are involved in selecting the students and the residents that fill out our ranks and who will be joining us in the coming years. A little bit of a caveat, I was told to unpediatric this presentation. This is a presentation I gave to the pediatric residency program for grand rounds, and I was told that it was too pediatric, so I tried to do that, but it's mostly emojis as it turns out, so I'm not going to be able to make it totally unpediatric. And the other thing is I was told to take some of the words out of it, so I did, and I put it into presenter view, and then I was told that we can't have presenter view here. So we'll see what goes on. What was I going to say? So the genesis of this presentation actually comes from an article I read in the New York Times about a year ago. And the article was by a dean at the University of Stanford. She's one of the dean of students, and she recounted the experience of counseling students as they come through the university process. And she said that over the years, she'd seen an increasing trend of students who had beautiful CVs, perfect CVs. They were every bit the student that you would expect them to be on paper at a very prestigious university. But then when they were faced with some of the basic challenges of adult life, doing their laundry, paying their bills, following up with a professor about a grade they didn't agree with, they were unable to do it. They fell apart. They fell apart sort of at the merest hint of adversity. And I thought, probably some of us in medical education will recognize that. We'll recognize some of our applicants and some of our learners and some of even our colleagues probably, who, when they face adversity, are not nearly the shining stars they are on paper. And it just so happened that there was an article in JAMA at about the same time that came out, and it had to do with sort of the negative relationship that many learners view towards pimping on the wards. Apart from a sort of inherently negative name, I wondered what else might be related to this. And so I wrote a quick letter to the editor, and I sort of expounded on some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. But they only give you 500 words for letters to the editor. So when I was asked to do a grand rounds for pediatrics, this expanded into this presentation. So my goals and objectives. I'm here to describe for you two patterns of behavior that learners exhibit when they're confronted by failure. I'm going to describe how an orientation towards mastery versus performance may lead to growth, or it might lead to helplessness. I'm going to demonstrate a correlation between a fixed mindset and a performance orientation. And I'm going to describe ways that a fixed mindset can be promoted by learning environments, our culture, and our institutions. And so as I was sort of doing my research for this presentation, as I was researching this topic in general, what I wanted to know is what makes people resilient in the face of adversity? What makes people resilient in the face of a failure? And as it turns out, this is something that a lot of people are interested in. The military is trying to figure out who is going to graduate from West Point. Sports teams want to know which athletes are going to come back after suffering a catastrophic injury. And you might think that doctors would be very interested in making sure that our colleagues and our learners and also our patients are able to demonstrate resilience. And it turns out that one of the people who's been working on this for the longest is a professor by the name of Carol Dweck at Stanford. And a lot of her work started really in the early 80s, and it focuses on what do people do, what do learners do, and specifically in her case, what do children do when they're faced with failure. One of her earliest experiments she sets up, she wanted to see what people do, how they respond to pre-programmed failure, essentially. And so she gathered a group of 10-year-olds in a room, and she gave them 8 easy questions, and then she sort of let them expound and recorded what they were talking about as they were doing the questions. And Not surprisingly, when they got through 8 questions really easily and they answered them all right, they thought that they were pretty smart, and they said so, and they were enjoying it, and they said so. But then the next problems were specifically too hard. The next 6 questions, she knew that they were going to fail at. They were way above their level. And as these students started to fail, 2 coherent patterns started to emerge. And the patterns had a cognitive, an affective, and a behavioral aspect to it. As you can imagine, the students most of the students really, who started to fail, they didn't really like failure. Most people don't like failure. And they started to get bored. They started to not pay attention. And they decreased their effort, actually. Instead of working harder on the tougher problems, they said, I can't do this. And they sort of wilted. Something else that was interesting about those students, though, is that as they were wilting, they started to sort of divert the reviewer's attention to other things. They said, my dad's really rich. We have a really nice car at home. They were excited to sort of tell the presenter about things that were totally unrelated. This is the earliest presentation of alternative facts that we know of. The second pattern, though, which was much more interesting, was a mastery-oriented pattern. And for these students, when they got to the tough questions that they weren't able to answer, instead of thinking, oh man, I'm dumb, they said, man, failure is related to my insufficient effort. I'm going to work harder. And they were positive about it. They said things like, I love a challenge. I was hoping this was going to be informative. And they increased their effort, actually, and some of them increased, actually, the sophistication of their problem-solving techniques as they were doing so. And rightfully so, Dr. Dweck asks, who are these freaks? What are these weird people who like to fail? And what can we learn from them? And so she in summary, what she said is there's an orientation towards mastery versus helplessness when we're faced with challenges that we can't necessarily overcome easily. And that these things, they develop sort of a coherent pattern in and of themselves. She asked, well, where does this pattern come from? And she hypothesized that different goals are what explain the different patterns. She said there might be performance goals, which means if you're concerned with proving how good you are, then you might have a specific pattern. And if you have learning or mastery goals, what you're really concerned about is improving your ability. So she set up another experiment, which is rather interesting and a little bit devilish. And she said, she sort of set the goals for the students. She told half of the group of students, she said, listen, we're going to give you a test, and it's going to measure your ability. And for the other half, she told them, we're going to give you a test, and it's going to teach you a new skill. And she gave them all a pretest, and regardless, she sort of randomized them. And she told some of them that they were really good at whatever they were going to do, and she told some of them that they were really bad at whatever they were going to do. And then she gave them the opportunity to choose sort of the next step here. She gave them a test, and then she said, okay, well, in your next test, you can do something that's hard, but it's passable, and it's not going to teach you anything, but you're going to look great. Or you can do something that's really easy, and it's not going to teach you any new skills, but you're going to finish it for sure. And then the third group was given something that said, this is hard, it's probably too hard for you, you're probably not going to pass it, but it's going to teach you a lot of new skills that are very important. And then they were all given the same test. As the sort of the patterns broke out, it was really interesting. So those who were told that they were being tested on their ability and that they had low skill at it the first time around, when they were given the opportunity to choose, they chose the easy test that wasn't going to teach them new skills. And when they were doing it, they actually fell into a helpless pattern, just as the other students had done. And sort of really interestingly, those who were told that they had a high ability, they went for hard but no skills most of the time, and a good percentage of them still fell into the helpless pattern. But I think the most important is those who were told that the test was there to teach them new skills, when they started to get into the tough aspects of the new quiz, they chose the hard task that they were told was going to give them new skills, and they demonstrated the mastery pattern. And so she said, well, how do these goals then generate this pattern of behavior? And basically what she said is there are, as we discussed, there are a tripartite aspect to it. So there's a cognitive, there's an affective, and there's a behavioral. And the cognitive says if the goal is to demonstrate demonstrate competence, then failure or high effort means that I have low ability. And if I have low ability, then that's sad. I'm not going to feel good about myself. I'm going to be worried about the possibility of future failure. And my behavior is that I'm going to avoid challenges and I'm going to avoid possible failures to protect sort of my ego. But if I have a mastery orientation, then the cognitive aspect is, then I'm here to learn. I'm here to sort of maximize my opportunities. And if I fail, well, then this is an opportunity for me to learn, and that's a good thing. And so the affective part of it is a good thing. There's no negative affective aspect to this. And then the behavioral part that comes from it is increasing effort. They seek better strategies, and they ask for assistance. And this shouldn't be something that sounds sort of totally off the wall to you guys. This is sort of the bedrock for cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Thoughts create feelings, feelings create behaviors, and behaviors reinforce thoughts. This is something that we use in our clinical practice all the time. Let me give you an example of how this might play out on words. Here's a case. So Mary Terry's a third-year medical student, and she's rotating on Team A with me. And she knows that I like to ask tough questions. Now, if she's a performance-oriented student, she wants to look smart. If she's a mastery-oriented student, she wants to learn as much as she possibly can. All right? So I'm going to ask some hard questions. And the first one she's probably going to get, okay? And she's going to say, if she's performance-oriented, she's going to say, yay, I'm smart. But if she's mastery-oriented, she's going to say, well, I already knew that stuff. It didn't teach me anything. But that's okay. But then we're going to get into deep water, right? I'm going to start asking questions that they can't answer. And that's by design, right? Because I want to teach them things. But if all they're worried about is performance, what they're going to get to is, man, I'm so dumb. Even my co-student is better than me. My co-student's answering these questions. And then, the affective portion of that is going to be very negative. But if she's mastery-oriented, what she might say is, wow, I don't know this stuff yet. It's a good thing that we're pointing out some of my weaknesses. I'm going to go home and study. I'm going to go home and look at these things. And hopefully get a better sense for this. Now, as we're sort of whiffing questions one after another, the student who's performance-oriented might say, man, this is boring anyway. I'm not good at this. I'm going to be an OBGYN. Why do I have to do these things? I hate this rotation. Team A is the worst. But if they're mastery-oriented, even if they want to go into OBGYN, they'll look at this and they'll say, oh man, there's so much to learn here. I'm actually growing. I'm becoming a stronger doctor. Even though this is not my favorite thing, it looks like this is going to be a good opportunity. And now when we get the opportunity for more challenges, now when I start to ask really tough questions, what do you think the performance-oriented student is going to do? She's not going to want to answer those questions. I'm not going to go near that question. I'm totally going to bomb that question. And she's going to miss out on an opportunity to learn. And that's where we as educators can start to get in on this action. This is the central paradox of being a medical student, I think. I remember this. The light blue is how much you know, and the dark blue is how smart you feel. And you can see, I guess, how do I turn this one on? No, here we go. So you can see, like, the first couple of questions you get right, you go, yeah, I got one right, how smart I am. And then you get another one right, you're like, I'm on a roll. And then you get a couple wrong, and you're not feeling that good about it, and then you get a few more wrong, and then you start to Google the LSAT, and then we're applying to Starbucks down here. But really, we've learned a lot, right? So if you were able to get all of those questions right the whole time, well, then you haven't learned anything in all the questions I've asking. And what am I doing if I'm not teaching you? But that's not the way we look at it. So then the question is, where do these goals come from? And this is the central question of this talk. And where they come from has been described as implicit theories of intelligence. And implicit theories of intelligence essentially state, where do you believe your intelligence comes from? Is it a fixed attribute of who you are? Is it in your genetic code? Were you born with your intelligence? Or is it something that you work at every day, that you strive to make greater, and that you can increase with hard work? And if intelligence is malleable, then mastery by means of effort is the goal, and if failure is a sign that more effort and different strategies are required. But if intelligence is a fixed trait, if you think you were born with all of the juice that you'll ever have, then demonstrating that intelligence is what you're trying to do. And then if you have to put in a lot of effort, or you fail, then that's a sign that you're not really as smart as you think you are. When we test this, when we look at this, it seems to bear out with the patterns that we talked about before. So when students are asked about whether they have an entity theory of their intelligence, whether they believe their intelligence is a fixed entity, they're much more likely to choose performance goals, especially goals that avoid challenges, and they're much less likely to choose learning goals. But if they believe in an incremental theory, meaning that they can increase their intelligence, they really don't choose performance goals, and they avoid these performance goals that are bereft of learning opportunity for them. And they really hew towards learning goals that they give them the opportunity to gain new knowledge. And this actually was something that was tested in graduate students in Hong Kong. The University of Hong Kong, at least 10 years ago, everything was taught in English, okay? And your success in life depended on how you did at the University of Hong Kong. If you were accepted to go there, it was a tremendous honor. And in order to do well, you had to speak English. And when researchers looked at a group of students with who they knew had poor English proficiency, they were able to do some digging, and they were able to divide them into a group that sort of agreed with this fixed mindset and a group that agreed with this growth mindset. In other words, a group that believed that their intelligence was never going to get any greater, and a group that believed that their intelligence was malleable. And they gave them the opportunity to take a remedial class in English. And would you believe it, that the group that had the fixed mindset, who didn't believe that their intelligence was malleable, chose, by and large, not to take that class, really risking their academic and really the rest of their future over not wanting to look silly, not wanting to look dumb. That's important. In another place they tried this was actually undergraduate students at Stanford, and they looked at trying to close the achievement gap. Now, as some of you may know, stereotypes weigh heavily on how students do at school, and so one of the things they thought was in order to close the achievement gap between African American students and white students, what they would do is they would try to change their mindset. They would try to give them a sense of this mastery-oriented, incremental mindset. And so they did an intervention, which is really quite clever. They had them assigned to pen pals who were middle school students, and the middle school students would write to them and tell them about some sort of academic trouble they were having. And half of the group was told to write them back with some sort of encouragement, and the other half was given training on how to increase sort of your intellectual ability through effort and hard work and changing your strategies. And so they didn't even know that they were actually being indoctrinated into this. And then they looked at their grades at the end of the semester. And it turns out that it didn't matter if they were black or white. All of the students who were exposed to this sort of mindset theory improved their GPAs. They had better satisfaction with their learning environment. And they cited education as more important in who they were than the students who didn't get that sort of exposure. And this has actually been studied in a number of different places. Implicit theories of intelligence have been looked at in the domains of mathematics, science, foreign language, and creativity. In every sense, the fixed beliefs block the development of mastery-oriented behavior. So in summary, mindset determines which goals are operational when we meet challenges. And this affects the resulting cognition and affect and leads to either adaptive or maladaptive behaviors when we approach a challenge or when we come to failure. But where do the mindsets come from? Where does this theory come from? How do we get imbued with it? And part of the answer is praise or feedback, culture, institution, and science. And we'll talk about each of those. But praise, we'll start with praise, because praise is a hell of a drug. If you get good feedback, you feel awesome. And it turns out that probably isn't necessarily a healthy thing for you. And anyone who sort of experienced the self-esteem wave in the 1990s and 1980s probably recognizes this is not a healthy thing. These graphs here look at students who were performing a test. They were given a test, and they were all uniformly told, hey, you did pretty well on this. You got 80% right, and that's it. Okay? Now, that was the control group. The intelligence groups, they were praised. They said, you must be very smart. You got 80% right. And then another group was told, you must have worked really hard on this test. You got 80% right. And then they asked them later, what type of tasks would you like to follow this up with? Would you like to follow it up with something easy that we know you'll get right? Or would you like to follow it up with something that's pretty hard that you're probably going to fail at? And by and large, the students who were praised for their intelligence said, man, I'd like to do something easy. I'm going to look smart again. I'm going to get that praise. And those who were praised for their efforts said, I want something that I'm going to work hard at, that's going to teach me something. And really the difference between them is pretty striking. You can see the proportion of students choosing a performance-type goal in the intelligence praised group is almost 70%, where it's under 10% for the group that was praised on their effort. They looked at this again in terms of what type of feedback or what type of information would they like after getting the task. They told these students, hey, listen, you did 80% on this last test, pretty smart, or you worked pretty hard. Would you like information on how other students did? Or would you like information on how to do better on this test? And by and large, the students who were praised for how smart they were wanted to find out how other people had done so that they could compare themselves. And those who had been praised for their effort Well, they wanted to find out how they could increase their performance on the next test. And this is, I think, especially striking. So you can see the line that sort of arcs up are students who were praised for their effort, and it represents the number of questions they tried even after getting a bunch of questions wrong. So between point A and point B, they did another test, and they were all told uniformly that they did very poorly on it. Okay? The students who had initially been praised for their intelligence tried far fewer questions than the students who were praised for their effort, meaning that just the mere act of telling people that they were really smart and then sort of maybe taking that away from them really decreased the effort that they put forward in terms of attacking these questions, attacking the task at hand. And this is something else that's really important because it also plays into professional behaviors. So students who are praised for their intelligence were actually much more likely than later to exaggerate the performance they had to another group of students, to tell them, hey, I got actually 100% of the questions right, as opposed to the 80 that they were told. Whereas students who were praised for their effort almost didn't do that at all. And that's, I think, really striking. And finally, they were asked, which do you believe? Do you believe that your intelligence is fixed, or do you believe your intelligence is malleable? And by and large, those students who were praised for their intelligence said, my intelligence is fixed, and those students who were praised for their effort said, my intelligence is malleable, and I'm going to work hard and continue to do well on these things. So food for thought, positive feedback that's not linked to a desired behavior, that's not linked to new learning strategies, that's not linked to effort, that's not linked to going the extra mile, but it's just sort of based on intelligence. Hey, you must be really smart. You did really well on rounds today. That actually probably is not beneficial for learners. And in fact, it may be that it takes away from their learning environment and harms them in the future. So where else does this come from? Well, it comes from culture. This is Alfred Binet. He's the inventor of the IQ test. And if there is ever something that was emblematic of whether or not intelligence is a fixed quantity or whether it's a malleable aspect, IQ should be sort of the one major example of that, right? Except for Alfred Binet didn't believe that. He developed the IQ test in order to help him identify students in the French educational system that would benefit from additional intervention. He said, a few modern philosophers assert that an individual's intelligence is a fixed quantity which cannot be increased. We must protest against this brutal pessimism. Well, despite his protestations, the bell curve and the IQ bell curve has been sort of synonymous with the two things. There are certain people who are just right here in the middle, right here, right here in the middle, and there are certain people who are going to be out on the wings, right? And we can't do much to help those people on either end. And this has been sort of extrapolated to some more dark things, right? So we've looked at this and we've seen in our culture that people have sort of attributed lack of success in minority populations to a different bell curve, that their genetics are just not as good as our genetics. This is in pop culture too, right? The dumb people are breeding. They're going to breed us out of existence. It's fixed. They can't increase their intelligence. And this has a lot of problems, right? It gives a plausible mechanism to the relationship between stereotypes and poor performance in a number of minority groups. In a study that was recently published in Science, girls as young as 6 years of age stop seeing themselves or seeing people of their same gender as being very, very smart. Unless you think that this is just related to children, when you look at the same distribution in a different study that was done with graduate students and postdocs in different STEM and humanities professions, they were asked which professions, which areas of academic research require you to be brilliant, require you to have something that's innate that you can't teach, and which ones require hard work. It turns out we have a problem with STEM and the percentage of women who are represented in STEM, but something really interesting happens here, right? So if we look at molecular biology and neuroscience and earth sciences, somewhere around half or even more than half of all PhDs that are awarded for those subjects are awarded to women. But what is striking about that is that these are also the fields of study that are also attributed to hard work. They're not the ones that require brilliance. Whereas under 20% of women are represented in philosophy PhDs. And this is one of the ones that's most highly correlated with just needing to be brilliant. You just have to be smart to be a philosopher. So we may be damaging our next generation of scholars in the same way. We're obsessed with it. We're obsessed with genius. We're always looking for the next Einstein. We're always looking for the next Michael Jordan. In an experiment, students were oriented to believe that Einstein and Edison were either great geniuses or that they were hardworking team players. And those who were oriented with genius were more likely to choose performance goals than those who were oriented for hard work. People who believe that they're idols and that our heroes are just born with it, they want to prove that they have it too. This is something that's very interesting to me. The majority of professional musicians will tell you that the most important feature of success is hard work, right? There's a sort of a joke about a young man who's wandering around Manhattan with a violin, and he's looking aimlessly in all different directions, and then he sees another guy with a violin, and he says, "Hey, sir, do you know how to get to Carnegie Hall?" And the guy goes, "Practice, practice, practice." Which is pretty lame, but it underlies sort of our beliefs about music ability. If you practice hard, you should be good at music. But it turns out that talent and genius strike here too. So professional musicians in the instrument in which was being tested were asked to rate a clip, okay? Now the clip was played by the same musician in both senses, okay? But the first clip, they were told, was played by a great virtuoso, someone who was self-taught and who's always been good and is soaring to new heights. And they were told the next clip is by someone who's very, very, very good, but he works exceptionally hard and he's a striver. He's out there sort of busting his butt. And universally, the professional musicians who listened to the very same musician play the very same clip always rated the virtuoso higher. They always thought that he did a better job, which is very concerning. There's also real-world implications for this, right? So looking smart has employment implications. The war for talent and the new war for talent had definitely sort of shaped the way that our corporate mindset views who we hire and who we attract. This is true of academic medicine, right? We're always looking for like the next great genius. We want the next Nobel Prize. And we're absolutely convinced that if we look at sort of their objective numbers, we're going to be able to get there. The match, medical school. So when I told my guidance counselor in undergrad at William & Mary, I want to go to medical school, she said, "That's great, never get a C in anything." And probably some of you got the same advice. They said, "Don't get too many B's either." And I thought, man, that's crazy. But what if I want to try French? Or what if I want to do modern dance? Or what if I want to take a religion class that I'm not familiar with? Just like that. Yeah, just like that. What if I get a C in it? I said, don't get a C. Do things that you're good at. Let me give you a case example. So imagine that you're a program director for a surgical or procedural subspecialty. Some of you don't have to imagine too hard. Some of you are. And imagine that you have the data from two applicants, right? They're both working on a simulator to perfect their technique. And applicant number one, he works on the simulator, and he's able to do it in 25 minutes. He scores 95% every time he does it, and he is awesome. Applicant B spends 12 hours over the next 3 days working on the same simulator. He's practicing his technique, and ultimately he's able to get 95% every time he does it at the end as well. Which applicant do you pick? Which is the one that you want? Now consider there are decreased case volumes. There are more stringent duty hour requirements. There's pressure to decrease medical errors. Who's the applicant do you want, right? But now think about this. What are some of the things that the applicant number two might have learned over the 12 hours that he spent striving to bust his butt to get there? What does he bring in terms of humility, in terms of his humanity to the interactions he's going to have with patients? And when surgical techniques change in 10 years, who's going to be able to spend 12 hours busting their butt to get it right? And who's not going to be able to do it? As Dr. Dweck says, speed and perfection are the enemies of difficult learning. So what does science say about this? Well, science, and especially we have to thank our colleagues in adolescent medicine, have been telling us for years that the brain continues to develop after pediatrics, right? So forever the adolescent medicine doctors have said, well, they're just not right because their brain is still growing. But the truth is actually it turns out that everyone's brain is still growing and developing. And if you look at studies with functional MRI, obviously in patients with stroke, they can regain the ability to speak. But people who are learning new languages will develop new neural networks and increased activity and even increased brain matter size in areas of the brain that are associated with language or empathy or creativity or even music, which means that our brains are very plastic and we can increase our abilities in all sorts of things. This myth that our brain is dying after the second decade is really not true. But there are some caveats here. So we're not saying that effort alone is what's going to get you there, right? So there's a number of reasons for that. Rich, well-connected white effort is typically more efficacious than poor, disenfranchised effort. This is a fact across our culture that we need to strive to remove these barriers. And this can't be used as a bludgeon to say, well, you should just work harder, and you'll get there. And we're also not lowering standards, right? This is not a participation trophy. If we lower our standards, our learners will feel entitled to easy work and lavish praise, and that's not what we're here for. Effort needs to be coupled with alternative learning strategies, a supportive learning environment, and ample time for improvement, right? Sisyphus didn't learn any lessons here. He rolled his rock to the top of the hill, it rolled down, he rolled it back up, it rolled down, it rolled it back up, it rolled down. He probably should have tried something different. This is also not prescriptive, right? So a certain number of people who have viewed failure in different ways, this is a picture of Bobby Knight, Bobby Knight, for those of you who don't know, have been very, very successful, okay? Now, Mr. Knight was incredibly well known, not just for his success on the basketball court, but for some of the colorful behavior he demonstrated in response to some of his more important failures. And so you might ask yourself whether or not he was particularly happy with his choice. But he was very, very successful, there's no doubt. So what if Mary Terry gets her motivation from competing with Patty? What if our medical students, they get motivated and they get amped up and they want to be the best that they can because they want to beat out their co-students? Well, if that motivates her and she does well and she feels like she's reaching her highest potential, great, right? As long as she's not sabotaging her colleagues. So this is not normative. We're all a mix of these different things, and different mindsets are at play in each of us, right? So I might believe that I'm not particularly good at math, for example, or I'm not particularly good at radiology or internal medicine, but I might feel that I'm, phenomenal at OBGYN because I'm able to work at it, or because it just comes to me when I have effort. So we're all a mix of these different things, and if you feel that having a performance goal and having this sort of approach to your learning is working for you, then by all means, continue to go for it. But for the people who are not doing well, this is something that we need to be considering, right? So for students who are falling through the cracks, or for people who feel like they're not reaching their highest potential, this gives us an opportunity for a place that we might have an intervention that might help them. Mindset interventions, like the one that actually you guys have just subversively sat through, have actually been demonstrated to improve performance in math scores and reading scores and overall school performance. And this is true of child learners, this is true of adult learners. But we also have to be asking ourselves about the environment that we're teaching in. What are the cultural or institutional pressures within our environment that might push our students to believe one thing or the other thing about their intelligence? What are we doing in terms of our recruiting practices? Are we recruiting people who have demonstrated resilience, or are we recruiting people who have only met with success? We have to ask: are we encouraging intellectual risk taking? Are we encouraging our students to take the risks that are necessary in order to really capitalize on the rich learning environment we have here? Or are we sort of dumbing things down for them? Are we decreasing the level of difficulty when the going gets tough? And how do we balance patient safety and the need for safe spaces to experience failure? Certainly, simulation will be one of the important places that we do this, but this is going to have to be done with real patients as well, and how do we balance that tension? And finally, what do our evaluations represent? What do they reflect for us? Here's a sort of a screenshot of our evaluations here. For those of you who don't know, this is what your evaluations look like. And this is medical knowledge here. And it goes all the way from should not finish this year to among the top 5 residents ever trained, which I don't know how you ever get there. But it begs a question, right? Because our patients all believe that you guys are here. And if they don't believe that you're here, then they think you're clearly superior. Essentially, their expectations of what you are at the end of 4 years of medical school and 3 years or plus of residency is competent physicians. Regardless of how much you've learned, if we pass you and you get an MD and you get a resident and you come out of our residency program, they expect you to do well. So does this type of evaluation really help us sort of move learners, move people who are struggling towards the side of increased performance, or does it sort of separate out again the cream, the people who have never failed? not to get too political here, but what does this mean for yourself? What does this mean for yourself? When you reach adversity, when you hit adversity, do you blame other people? Do you make excuses for your failures? Do you find yourself feeling threatened by other people's success? Or do you own it, and do you find a way to move forward from it? Do you find a way to reach deep inside and figure out sort of what strategies do I need to change? What aspects of my learning technique aren't benefiting from me? How do I improve my relationship with my peers to sort of maximize my potential? So these are my final take-home points. I hope I haven't bored you too much. Mindset is a theory of personality that integrates an individual's self-theories of intelligence to explain their motivations, beliefs, emotions, and behaviors. And modern neuroscience supports this conclusion. The human brain is incredibly plastic, and abilities in many cognitive domains can be developed through effort and growth. Cultural and societal narratives in many cases ignore or undermine this knowledge, which can foster mixed mindsets. Mindset is far from complete or comprehensive. Humans are very complex. We all are different mixes of these different things. But it can be a helpful tool to explain why some individuals succeed and others fail, despite equivalent ability. And finally, a growth mindset can be manipulated and fostered by targeted feedback in favor of mastery versus performance, and that our teaching practices should recognize the deleterious potential of fostering a fixed mindset. And with that, I am willing to take questions.
Matt, thank you for the energy and enthusiasm with which you obviously are engaged in this topic, and I think it has significant implications for the way we as physicians are lifelong learners and how we view ourselves as we move through various phases of our career. I'll open it up for questions. Yeah, Alex.
Matt, thank you for this. It's terrific. How do you tackle the generational differences of our learners with the theory that you just
It's I think it's really challenging for a number of different reasons, right? So as sort of we've talked about or people have discussed, this is sort of like the generation of self-esteem, right? That like everyone was perfect and everyone got participation trophies. But the truth is that we fostered that we developed that. Higher education at the top sort of said, well, we only want the perfect applicants. And actually, one of the things that led to this presentation is, as I discussed, the sort of op-ed about that student who arrives at the university looking perfect on paper, but is unable to sort of deal in the adult world. The dean's response was, oh, well, it has to go back to parents, and parents have to teach their students how to fail. And really the subtext of that is, stop sending us the fake perfect students, send us the real perfect students. And I think we have to ask ourselves here at the top, well, what is it that we want, and how do we assess those things? Because if we want students who have resilience, then we have to sort of change the metrics by which we recruit them and by which we sort of evaluate who has the greatest potential.
Do you have any suggestions if you're, say, trying to coach somebody who has a fixed mindset into this growth mindset to convince them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think, so as I mentioned, some of the simplest things actually have a profound ability to sort of subvert the way that you look at yourself. This, again, is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? We give people intellectual tools to say, well, if you're reacting in a certain way, what are you feeling about the context you're in that's making you feel that you have to react in that certain way? And what's the underlying intellectual thing that you're telling yourself that sort of leads to those processes? And so what I would recommend is, one, to help them recognize when they start to feel threatened or feel like they need to perform, and have them step back and say, okay, well, do I really need to perform here, or do I really need to learn and grow here? Because if, for example, we've all had the student on wards who says, who sort of hangs at the back, who doesn't want to answer questions, who feels very threatened when you ask them questions. And so what I do at the beginning of rounds, at the beginning of the time I take on service, I say, I'm going to ask a lot of tough questions, and I don't expect you guys to know any of them. If I'm asking the question, I don't expect you to know the answer. Because why would I ask a question that I already expect you to know, right? I expect you to get a lot of questions wrong the first time, right? I want you to learn, I want you to grow, but we're expecting you to fail. This is a safe space to fail. And I think that that's effective. I think that people will attempt to answer things and attempt to learn from circumstances in a way that sort of opens them up and makes them more receptive to getting feedback and growing.
How does our learning culture of praise compare to those that don't praise as much, like other cultures where it's more, or praise is not as much? Like, how does the self-esteem of both those learners compare?
So it's interesting. So you mean like in other cultures, like for example, like in other countries?
Yes.
So praise is one part that we have control over, which is one of the reasons why I stress it, right? So we have an ability to control praise. But the truth is that a large percentage or a large portion of where this mindset comes from actually isn't from praise, right? It's from some of the cultural reinforcements. And those things are like impressively prevalent across cultures, right? And sort of there are spoken things, like we're looking for the next Einstein, or we're looking for the next genius, that we see in a lot of different countries, right? Where intelligence and intellect are incredibly highly valued. And then there are the unspoken things, like the bonus you get for being successful, or the amount of my salary that Dr. Weiss is going to take away for giving this presentation. Right? So there's an invisible hand that's at play. So praise is part of it, but the real world praises you as well in different ways that aren't necessarily spoken. And so I would say that this is pretty universal.
Do you think the pass and fail system for evaluating performance is probably better, or would you never?
I do, but I think that the bar has to be very high. So one of the things that medical education is working towards is competence, right? So we have EPAs, we have milestones. We want people to be competent at the end. And I think one of the things that we have to do is say, yes, pass-fail is good, but we have to raise the bar. The bar has to be very high. And when people don't reach it, we have to be there to say, okay, well, what's the next strategy? What are we going to do to sort of get you to that very high bar that your patients expect you to have, right? Because we can't say pass-fail and then, like, passes 5th percentile, right? We have to say pass-fail, but passes the 95th percentile. We want to bring everyone up. We don't want to dumb it down.
Are there any examples of institutions that are selecting people by a resilience-based standard, or comparing a cohort of individuals selected by a resilience-based standard to a more traditional performance achievement standard?
So that's a good question. So this is something that's essentially unheard of in medicine, right? So most of you probably have not heard of implicit theories of intelligence, and this is something that I think is sort of going to be very important. But in a lot of different areas that it is, and one of the places is West Point, is looking at, well, how do we choose the candidates who will get through West Point and become successful officers? And one of the things that's very striking about the way that when they started looking at this, they actually recruited a psychologist who's one of the acolytes of Dr. Dweck, who's sort of come into renown on her own. Her name is, her last name is Duckworth. I can't remember her first name, but she's written a book called Grit. And essentially, they want to know who are the gritty people who are going to be resilient when things hit the fan. And the answer is that none of the test scores, none of the performance in college, none of it matters. Who's going to succeed comes down to sort of personal characteristics, and it's really hard to choose who those people are, and they're working on it. So that's like sort of the next step is how do we, when we're selecting people, learn from those institutions that are doing that, to choose applicants that have some of the same characteristics. And there are scales and aspects of people's past that reflect some of those things. So for example, when I do interviews, I always ask every interviewee that I interview, I ask them, tell me about a time that you failed. I tell them medicine is all about how you learn from your failures. Your success as a doctor will be sort of predicated on how well you can identify the times that you've gotten something wrong and that you can learn from it. So tell me about a time that you failed and how did you come back from it? And a striking number of people can't remember a time they ever failed during medical school, that they ever made a mistake during medical school. I think if you can't recognize a mistake that you made during medical school, then probably either A, you don't have insight, or B, you don't have the courage to recognize it. And that's really important, right? So I think that there are things that will help us select those candidates, but they haven't been necessarily worked out yet, but people are working on that.
A comment that kind of piggybacks on what Eric was asking about. So, I mean, this doesn't just apply to individuals, right? It's been institutionalized. We just had kind of vigorous discussion at our ranking list for the internal medicine program, because as a program, we have a performance mindset. Like, we have to have a certain percentage, passing first time on the boards. And so that drives how we select our candidates. And it's going to take, because it's so built into the whole system, it's really going to take, I think, a lot of effort to try to buck against that and have other criteria for selecting.
And courage, right? It's going to take a tremendous amount of institutional courage for us as institutions to stand up and say, the way that we're doing it is not working. The outcomes that we're measuring are not the ones that are important to our patients. And the results that we're getting from the way that we're doing it is not working. We need to change. And that's going to take a lot of institutional courage.
So I want to go back to some of what you referred to with Bob Knight and probably Malcolm Gladwell
Mm-hmm.
in talking about effort and positive reinforcement. So if you're interviewing people and you're asking them about when they failed, are you also asking them about what it felt like to be successful? And then I want to ask you, when you're making rounds, do you ask questions so that people know they can get that answer correct? So that there's a sense that not everything in front of them is something they don't know?
That's a good question. So, in terms of, so let me sort of break the two things down. So in terms of the interview process, so typically, that's not the only thing we dwell on during my interview. And typically, students will tell you about the things that they've done well and they've succeeded on. And you usually give them an opportunity to discuss those things. So tell me about yourself. Tell me about the things that you've done well. What are you proud about in terms of your academic career? So I think that they get an opportunity to discuss some of those things and talk about some of those things. In terms of how I do rounds, so I do ask some softball questions. I don't ask just bombs. I'm not the devil. Maybe I am a little bit, but
But just the orientation to, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions that you're not going to know the answer to, and you're telling us that things need to be effort-oriented and to be motivational and be driven that way, not about how smart they are, but driven. How do you drive them, right, so that it's not pitched, so that they don't start out with not knowing, but actually they're driven to know more because they already know something. It's a different pitch.
It's a different pitch. I'm not sure that necessarily so I would say that certainly sometimes people feel good about getting an answer right? So like you ask a question that you know that they'll be able to answer, and then they feel good and they feel like they can build off of that success, which is I think what you're trying to say. And for some people that certainly might be beneficial, and we'll give them the opportunities to do some of that stuff, right? And in theory, some of what you're doing on rounds is already that. So when you are getting ready to present a patient in the morning, the idea is that you've sort of put together your best presentation. And so I think that they have a lot of opportunity. I think learners have a lot of opportunity to sort of show you that they can get stuff right and that they're good at different things, and that they will, they have a wealth of knowledge that's coming behind them. And that's part of what we're doing in terms of assessment, right? So we want to ask some of those things to make sure that there's like a baseline fund of knowledge there. But in terms of whether or not that drives success or drives long-term growth, I don't know that I would agree with that. I don't know that that's something that I would necessarily buy into. I think that probably, when you look at sort of the way that medicine has changed since you were in medical school and residency, it's probably very significant, right? You probably have learned, we've learned things that have entirely changed the paradigm of how medicine works. And if you're sort of solely driven on having past success, I don't know that that'll give you sort of the resilience you need to catch up in a world that's moving very quickly.
Very interesting. Here's my question. If you are teaching, which you are, to deliver knowledge, given a limitation of time, which is the major problem for everybody, right? Everybody is very much in the problem. It's much easier to feed somebody with a kind of knowledge and tell them, this is what happens, than to teach the same person the reason to get to that point. My impression that given the current situation of what medicine has changed, society, etc., the first one is applied much more often the second.
Yeah, I would say that that's 100% correct, and I think that speaks to sort of what we've discussed, that we've essentially developed our assessment is based on whether or not you can regurgitate the information that I feed you, which in some ways that is a test of how well I feed it to you as opposed to how much you've learned. And so I 100% agree with you. I think that's hugely the problem. And
You see it in fellows, not just in residents, in fellows.
And probably, if we're honest, we see it in other attendings, right? And so
I didn't want to say that.
no, but so let me be honest with you. Part of the genesis for this talk is because I recognized a lot of these behaviors in myself. I started reading about this, and I was like, man, this is who I am. I'm afraid to let people know that I don't know stuff. I'm afraid to tell my colleagues that I don't know the answer to the question that they're asking me. So I don't know the answer to the question you're asking me. But what I think, as we mentioned, is it's going to sort of take a change in the paradigm. And rather than saying, we have to teach this to you in this number of years, what we have to say is you have to be able to demonstrate over however long it takes that you have learned how to reason to get to the answer. And that'll have to change the way that we fund ACGME. That'll have to change the way that we fund medical school and the length of time that we have in medical school. It'll be a very challenging question, and it's something that's on the horizon for us, I think.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Thank you. Think it was any good? Was it any good?